I am Quentin Collins, the Assistant Director of LaSalle University's Solstice MFA in Creative Writing Program. Welcome again to our Winter 2023 reading series, this one featuring our graduating students, Deborah Harper Bono and Noah Shea. So you can get us started now. All right, as we open this physical and virtual space, I would like to acknowledge that the territory on which LaSalle University stands is that of the Pawtucket and the Massachusetts people. LaSalle's campus is a place to honor and respect the history of the Native and Indigenous communities who continue to reside in the area currently known as Massachusetts, and the continued efforts of their community leaders to ensure that history is not oversimplified or lost. This statement is just one small step in acknowledging the history that brought us to reside on this land and to help us seek understanding of our place within that history. Ownership of land itself is a colonial concept, and we acknowledge that the ideal restorative measure is the return of land to Indigenous and Native communities. The Solstice MFA program of LaSalle University seeks ways to be part of a better future going forward. As we grow, we pledge to seek out Native writers for our faculty and guest faculty. And meanwhile, we have established an Abuse Fellowship for Native and Indigenous writers, which will be granted to an incoming Solstice student annually. We hope to inspire others to take action as well. One way you might do so is to consider a gift to the Native Land Conservancy, based in the area currently known as Mashpee, Massachusetts. More information is available at nativelandconservancy.org. Tonight's reading remains one of the biggest highlights of the residency for me. Not only do I personally understand the excitement and anxiety that comes with checking off another milestone toward graduation with an MFA degree from Solstice, but also I have the privilege of seeing the result of hard work our students complete over 2 years, 4 semesters, and now including this residency, 5 residencies. Since Deborah and Noah started our program, I have seen their dedication to writing craft as well as their commitment to this community. Congratulations to you both. The world awaits your poems, stories, improv comedy, and magic shows. First up, we will have graduating poetry student Deborah Harper Bono, who will be introduced by faculty member Anne-Marie Oman. Then we will have graduating fiction student Noah Shea, who will be introduced by faculty member Stephen Huff via faculty member David Yu. Anne-Marie.
This is going to be First of all, congratulations to both Deb and Noah. Well done. When I asked Deb what was the most central tenet of her wide-ranging, adventurous poems, she said, how we become who we are. She said it with her usual confidence, in that voice I have come to enjoy for its conviction. But then, in another reaction that we've all seen, she will laugh and rough up her hair and say with her usual humor and equal energy, you know, I changed my mind about that. And this is what I so appreciate and respect about Deb, this willingness to brave the process, to test the hypothesis, to take a stab so that whatever is being discussed is out in the open to be examined, to find out how it and we are made. Her manuscript, Rebel Blooms, is no exception. In an anchor series embedded in the manuscript, she retells part of the Arthurian myth. Not Arthur so much as his mom and dad, often overlooked, that very dicey relationship between Igraine and Uther, the illicit union that produced Arthur. And if you don't remember it, I tell you, it beats Game of Thrones and Meghan and Harry altogether. In Deb's retelling, she does what she says. She subverts the myth, reassigns the motives, reinterprets the characters almost to their opposites so that the story becomes a Janus of itself. But then these Pendragon poems are placed among other poems that reveal and explore the daily now, the unions and disunities of our times. She threads the myth into a contemporary pageant, lets them texture the quotidian, from sports to hayfields, from men she never slept with to old dogs she has, from the passions to the promises that make us who we are. Rebel Bloom is rebellious in the right ways, and the brave-hearted legend of Deb Bono will live on. Please welcome her.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I had a whole thing where I was going to come up here and read a poem first before I said anything, but I can't not respond to that amazing introduction. Thank you so much. I'm going to do a little bit like that. Spell. Here in this garden, clover, cowslip, rippled stream, I feast on strawberry moon, bee butter honey, crusty bread. Fog and firefly fizzle a scrim between worlds. Sometimes I see Avalon from the bedroom window. Thank you, Ammo, again. Thank you, Megan Q, for making this space. Welcome to all of you here. Welcome to all of you on live stream. Many of you know this already. I am Deborah Harper Bono, and I am this close to being a newly minted Solstice MFA grad. I'm going to start with a little background. Ammo stole some of my thunder, but not all of it. The King Arthur story has resonated for me since I was a kid. I rode horses, I studied fencing, I crinkled aluminum foil into fake armor. I even have a time travel screenplay tucked away somewhere. And as Emma said, these next 3 poems comprise my reimagining of Arthur's origin story. So in the legend's best known variant, warrior King Uther Pendragon, seeking an alliance with Gorlois, the Duke of Cornwall, instead becomes obsessed with Gorlois' wife, Igraine. Magically disguised as Gorlois by his cousin Merlin, Uther spends the night with an unwitting, possibly unwilling Igraine, a fact the legend often glosses over. Meanwhile, Gorlois, battling Uther's armies elsewhere, is killed, and 9 months later, Igraine bears the child Arthur. In my telling, centered on these 3 characters, their internal compasses are more modern, pointing them towards insight, self-awareness, and self-advocacy, while they navigate that eternal conflict between passion and reason. Just an alert, there are 1 or 2 moments of strong language. Gorlois takes stock. Here's what I remember. Uther, shoulders sharp as Cornwall's cliffs, persuaded us to bind our armies, drive the Saxons to the sea. Attended by his 1,000 men, he crossed my counties, brought that weirdo wizard cousin, made his case. Band together, he bargained. We can defend. We can govern ourselves. I was convinced. Hell, we all were. Fuck the Saxons. Plus, we knew he could fight. Women liked him too. The man oozed swagger. The only one among us who wore no beard, I thought he looked like a boy. The ladies lined up for him, though, and when he met Igraine, my queen, I heard the crack, like breaking bone, the sudden smell of lightning, scorched earth. I swore I could see smoke. She looked away, but I caught the blood-hot hunger in her eyes. her bright burnt cheeks when he said her name. She'd never looked at me like that, but there's no law that governs love. 3 days they stayed, 3 days of talk, 3 nights of feast and too much drink. Fights broke out among the younger blades. That final revel, I partied harder, staggered from the crowd later than herself. Wasted, breathing loud, I willed the walls to stop their swirl. Must have dozed, awoken when she ditched our bed, slipped silent from our room. Chill moon flooded her hollow space. I didn't need a wizard cousin to tell me where she'd gone. Igraine catches catnip fever. We all knew who he was, what he'd done. Cut a swath from Scotland to the sea. All eyes followed Uther as he strode into that hall. The shortest man among us, but in his swagger, 6 feet at least. Clean shaven, unlike the others, his hair a mess of dust and heat. I hardly heard his footsteps as he crossed the space, but felt his pull. Mingled scents of gorse and ocean, just ripe strawberries, scorched rock. Can something smell wild? I sat straight, separate, scrupulously restrained. Caught Merlin in his scrutiny of me, even as I secretly appraised his lord. I'm sure Uther knew I watched him. Men like that always knew. He sat beside my husband, not yet an adversary, while I feigned indifference, ached to keep him close. He stayed 3 days, 3 days, 3 nights, my head overrun with fancies of his voice, his stance, the cadence of his gait. I breathed the impossible, his battle gear pressed against my skin, my back pressed against his sheets. In dreams, I wove him heather garlands, rode him like a courser. Had I fooled anyone? Unfastened, unfurled, I found his room that 3rd night and scored him in his bed. Our fingers tangled together. I knew he'd go in the morning, had no thought of what we'd founder in the wake. Treaties, allies, the will to sheathe the Saxons. Whatever it cost, only this mattered. This breath, this body. So bright, his lips, so soft. In Uther's voice, I knew when Gorlois found us, he would stab me in the heart. It started with the Saxons, invaders, predators. I wanted them out. I needed that alliance. All the chieftains, even the puny ones. Gorlois was the key. He controlled the most land, commanded the best army. His influence spread the widest. They said his queen was brilliant, beautiful, that he bet on her judgment in matters of state. Fine with me. She'd clearly counseled well. Everyone bootlicked him. We marched to his stronghold. Merlin, my men, me. Gorlois greeted us, his consort beside him. Her hair the color of oiled bronze, her skin sun-bright from roaming the cliffs. A huntress then. If her instincts matched her looks, they'd be good indeed. 3 days. 3 days we ate, we drank, took a little here, gave a little there. My alliance edged closer. 3 short days. I might have, for my part, kept a distance, but even as she sat with us, straight-backed and formal, her cheeks flushed, her breathing sparked. Desire so sharp it pierced like an arrow storm. And I wouldn't have noticed except I did. I relished the fierce center of battle, the freedom of a hard fought. This was something else. Even Merlin begged me, leave this place. All that followed was the comet trail from that folly. The 3rd night, I wouldn't have risked it myself. She came to my bed, watched me restless sleep, close to the surface, stood in moonlight as I opened my eyes, her cloak slipping from her bare shoulders, her hair wreathing her body like a mermaid's tail. I could face the rancor of my own unquenched lust. I could not resist the swelter of hers. She breathed my name, Lisa. I couldn't pretend I didn't want her, couldn't tell her no. Did I care if anyone had seen her come to me? Did I care at that moment about anything else? Even as I conjured the slice of his blade, cleaving my breastbone, my rib cage, everything I'd achieved, everything I protected, I shattered my allowance, blasted it to bits for her. Well, we've all been there one way or another, haven't we? Loved someone we shouldn't have, not loved someone we should. Here are a few more poems about that. Men I never slept with, a poem of restraint. Elvis, Batman, Ryan Gosling, President Kennedy, Henry V, my high school sweetheart, young Winston Churchill, that amber-eyed stranger in seat 7H, the vet who smells like hay and lemons, Mr. Darcy, MacGyver, LeBron, you. Everybody wants to be a cowboy. The year she lived in Texas, prairie pulled by a wild sky, she sold silver belt buckles to incomers who hankered after a Western look. She bought herself some rocket buster boots, but even in jeans and tees and the new kickers, she was a bad fit. And not only because everyone else fancy dressed just to go to the grocery store. She dated a man who'd never driven beyond the town boundaries. Corralled in her bed, they played with ropes and cinches, breakaway calves, just a holler from the stockyards. Edith puts on a brave face. Her mirrored shades sunder the sunset as she blinks away her divorce, collects her daughter's piano teacher from the 6:05 New York train. These weekly lessons run late, so he stays overnight, teaches while she prepares dinner. The apartment's tiny kitchen limits her options, and she chooses something simple, but a little special, chicken Marengo. Edith's daughter hates chicken Marengo, skips straight to dessert, Zuckertorte from the Hungarian bakery down the block. Edith, tipsy from her single glass of wine, eases into this visit, a soothing compress on her migraine light. Poetry simmers in the piano teacher's black hair, his blue, blue eyes. He says he's met someone, a dancer. He's sure Edith will love her, wants to introduce them next week. Edith picks a piece of lint off her sleeve, smooths her skirt. That sounds fine. Of course she'd like to meet his dancer friend. This last poem, praise poem, is dedicated to one of my heroes. Ode to Grit on Rafael Nadal, winning his 13th French Open at 34. On the high bounce red clay of Roland Garros, you burn absolute, serves blazing, ground strokes like bullets. Taught with wonder, I marvel at the angles, the casual ferocity of your baseline return, your battle-charged strokes. 2 hours and 41 minutes later, the shortest men's final in French Open history, a blistering ace blows past your opponent, Current world number one, the decisive victor in your previous contest. You sink to your knees in the red dust, particles clinging like lovers, all uncertainty banished in straight sets. On this red court, where you've won every final you've ever reached, you rise invincible, herringbone souls stained red, king of clay. I imagine inhabiting your will, your discipline, cloaking my unrequited ambition in wrath of resolve. Fierce, reforged, crushing what mere mortals call doubt, knowing that absent your armaments, all the conditioning in the world would not get me to that trophy. Watching you, I could live forever. Thank you. And now, my colleague.
That was amazing, Deb. Just a reminder, as Quentin mentioned at the start, I am going to be reading an introduction written by faculty member Stephen Huff. I just want to make clear beforehand that I in no way, shape, or form agree with anything I'm about to say. The writer of historical fiction has all the usual challenges of story, structure, and technique of other genres, but also one that's specific to its period. While the writer of futurist fiction often must create a universe, it is one that works according to the writer's imagination and elaborations. The writer of historical fiction, however, must research a past world that does not yield its realities to imagination. The writer must get it right, make it vivid, must guide the reader on a fictive arc through that territory, its modes of dress, lexicons, cuisines, technologies, or lack thereof, through its customs, taboos, and commonly held assumptions. In other words, tell it like it was. Without intelligence, hard work, and dedication, the writer will come up short. Noah Shea's novel is set mostly in the South during the Civil War. His protagonist is a young Union infantryman named Abel, who after a series of circumstances is planted in Richmond by the War Department as a Union spy. Life in the Confederate capital in the realities of its time for both free and enslaved people is vividly depicted. Abel, whose home is a backwater in Maine, originally joined a sharpshooter unit over the wishes of his father, who, although himself an abolitionist, desperately needed his son at home on the farm. But while Abel's own sense of duty takes him to war, he struggles with his conscience after he has to kill to save his own life. He experiences inner turmoil and fear when in Richmond he finds himself cut off from his contacts in Washington, his feelings of helplessness when he witnesses the brutal treatment of slaves, his anguish as he wonders if, with blood on his hands, he's actually helping a higher cause. All this through the eyes of a young man who had never been to a large city until he went to war, whose former worldview he comes to realize had been one of naivete, now being altered more quickly than he can quite absorb. Noah has the storyteller's gift, but this novel is not merely the product of his imagination, but his research, his seriously thinking through what the life of such a man as Abel, in such a time and place, must have been like, and the product of perseverance and faith, and the blessed assurance of unremitting hard work. Abel, like the other characters in his book, is unforgettable. Please welcome Noah Shea.
Wow. Thank you so much, Steve, for those kind words. Thank you, David, for reading them on his behalf. That was very generous. And thank you all for being here, whether in person or on the live stream. My name is Noah, and tonight I'll be reading from my manuscript, As you heard, it's about a young man named Abel, who's a spy during the Civil War. He's been sent to Richmond to infiltrate a Confederate society called Sub Rosa. And over the course of the story, Abel develops a friendship with an enslaved woman named Henrietta. Together, they work to undermine the Confederate war effort and to revive the Underground Railroad around Richmond. So in this excerpt, Abel has already infiltrated Sub Rosa. He's been gifted a horse by the organization's leader, the colonel, and on his first ride, being an inexperienced horseman, he's bucked off. When he falls, he cuts his arm pretty bad and it begins to bleed severely. And before I begin, I just want to give a content warning. This is a story that's set in America in the 1860s. There's some language in here that is politically incorrect, antiquated, frankly offensive by today's standards. It's not the N-word, but it's still offensive. If you think that would make you uncomfortable, then I invite you to feel free to not listen to this piece. Abel was not sure how long he'd been sitting under the tree. He wasn't even sure if he'd been conscious for the duration of his sit. His arms stung like hell. Some distance down the road, though it was shrouded in darkness, he listened to the steady clop of hooves. It wasn't long before he noticed the flicker of a lantern as it bobbed up and down. It drew nearer, and the light illuminated the face of a brown horse. But Abel could not see past the lantern to make out the face of the rider. When the horse was only a few paces away, it occurred to Abel this may be his one chance to call for help. He opened his mouth to shout, but found himself too weak to muster his voice any louder than speaking volume. "Excuse me," he said. "Sir." He wasn't sure if the rider could hear him. The horse stopped in front of his tree. Now Abel could make out the rider's face. It was the man who had passed by earlier in the evening. He was white, appeared to be about 40, had a long black beard streaked with gray. He was wrapped in a big brown cloak. Underneath, he wore a plaid shirt, mostly clean, and donned a tattered cap. "Can I help you?" the man asked. "I ain't sure. Can you take me back to the city?" The man shook his head. "Sorry, friend. I would, but I ain't got the time tonight. I can point you the right way. You just follow this road, and that ain't my problem. I got to get a doctor. Hope quick, too." "Is that right?" "Yes, sir. My horse bucked me and ran off." The man dismounted, walked over to Abel, and squatted down next to him. "Where you hurt then?" "My arm." Abel pointed to the bloody left sleeve. "Okay, show it to me." Abel rolled up his sleeve and exposed the lacerated flesh. The man inspected it for a long moment. "It's bad," he said. "I know. That's why I need a doc." The man sat for a moment, as if he wasn't sure what to say next. The concern on his face told Abel everything he needed to know. Maybe he looked like a lost cause. But this man wasn't just going to sit here until Abel died, was he? "Well, it's like I said. I can't get you to the doctor tonight. I'm headed home. I can take you there with me. My wife is handy with a needle, and I reckon she'll fix you up." Abel stared a long look down the road in the direction of Richmond. "Where's your house at?" "It ain't too far. Down by the tracks, maybe 2 or 3 miles. Abel wondered how long he'd have to be at the stranger's house. Hector might miss him from his duties at the tavern. He'd come up with some excuse. It wasn't worth dying over. "All right, you lead the way." "Hold it, friend. You need a bandage before we're going anywhere. Can't have you bleeding out on me halfway." The man stood up and approached his horse's saddlebag. He dug around inside and produced a pair of shears. Then he came back to the tree and knelt by Abel's bad arm. He cut the bloody sleeve from Abel's shirt and tossed it aside. Then he cut a long strip of cloth from its clean sleeve. He fashioned the cloth around Abel's wound and tied it off tight. The man stood up and offered Abel a bloody hand, then pulled him to his feet. He felt unsteady. "You going to be able to hold on to my horse?" the man asked. Abel held his good hand to the bandaged gash. "I'm not sure." "Better not risk it then." The man grabbed his horse's reins. "I suppose you're right," Abel said, then paused. "My horse ran into that meadow. She still might be there, but I couldn't see her through all that dark." "Ought to be worth a look," the man said. "My horse, Whiskey, loves the grass there." The man took his lantern in one hand and led Whiskey with his other. "Reckon you'll keep up?" "Sure, just take it slow." "Okay, we'll go easy." Abel walked side by side with the man, but allowed him to lead the way with the lantern. The light swung around. The illuminating only a small portion of the field at a time as they searched. Here, Abel said, after a few minutes of wandering. The man turned to lower the lantern close to the ground where Abel pointed. There were hoof prints in the muddy patch between the long grass. Not bad. Reckon you some kind of tracker. I've done my share of hunting, ain't no expert. Well, I reckon we'll find your horse over yonder. The pair pushed further into the meadow. Progress was slow. Abel could no longer stay step in step with him, but the man was kind enough to wait while Abel caught up. Ahead, the light caught the dark silhouette of a big beast, head down in the grass. That's got to be her, ain't it? The man said. Better not get too close or we'll spook her again. Why don't you beckon her over? Abel whistled and clicked his tongue to get Scarecrow's attention. He watched her silhouette. Her head rose and stared them down. No one moved. The man said that he had something that might do the trick. He went back to his saddlebag. When he found what he was looking for, he came back to Abel's side. Always bring a couple apples with me in case whiskey gives me any grief, he said. Then he held out the apple, offering it to Scarecrow, and beckoned her himself. She hesitated. Then, with a great deal of caution, she approached. She inspected the apple, sniffed it a couple of times before she took it, chewed, and swallowed. The man patted her big head, stroked her neck, and told her what a beautiful horse she was. You have a way with horses, Abel said. Yes, sir. Been riding since I was just a lad. He flashed Abel a smile. Can't say the same, though, can you? Two began their walk back to the road. The man asked Abel if he could lead Scarecrow on his own, and Abel assured him that was all right. Their horses followed them down the dirt path as they snaked through fields and patches of trees. The night was still dark. The moon glowed high up through cloud cover. The light must have gotten lost somewhere on its journey down to the road. About a half hour later, the man said it was time to step off the trail. He led Whiskey into a patch of trees, and Abel followed suit. The man pointed and said that his house was just a little further. They would have to push through this thicket of trees, then it would come into view. The walk wasn't as bad as Abel feared. He found that he regained some of his energy after he'd been rescued. There was hope that he would be patched up by dawn, and then he could go back to the inn before anyone was any the wiser. The house fell into view. There was either a small fire burning in the hearth or candles lit. Orange light flickered and danced in the smudged windows. The house was modest. It was one floor, slightly elevated on stilts, in place of a foundation, with a set of rickety stairs that led to the front door. The exterior was painted white, or it was at one point, but now it looked weathered and gray. You can hitch Scarecrow out here beside Whiskey. She can share the water from the trough, the man said. Then he hitched Whiskey to a post. Abel mirrored him and gave Scarecrow some gentle rubs behind her ears, which made her snore. Then the two men left their animals and descended the creaking stairs. Mary will fix you up in no time, the man said just outside the door. He knocked. It wasn't that odd. A man knocking on the door of his own house. There was shuffling and hushed voices inside. The man waited until the noise stopped, then opened the door. The room was mostly empty, save for an unpainted wooden table and chairs, a cast iron stove, a bed with a sizable portion of its headboard missing, and two small dressers stacked on top of one another. On the far wall was a painting of some stone clock tower. Abel wondered if somewhere there was a real tower just like it. Also inside the single-roomed house, there was a woman who Abel assumed must be Mary. She was short and stout, with dark hair, wore a light blue bodice and skirt. She stared into the fireplace, but turned as the door opened. She got up and ran to her husband, threw her arms around him. He embraced her, let go, removed his big cloak and hung it on the nail beside the door. The cloak had a hood, detail Abel missed out in the darkness. Hold on, the man said to Mary. We got someone here who needs you to sew him up. Mary's mouth dropped open, then shut. She glanced behind her husband. Abel stumbled through the threshold. There was someone else inside. It must have been who the other hushed voice had belonged to. A black man looking bedraggled, with long hair and dreads, a scraggly beard, with patched clothes that were far too big for him, was seated at the table. He was staring down at a gap in the floorboards, remained still as Abel entered. Another dark hooded cloak rested on the chair back behind him. I never asked for your name, the man said. Abel hesitated for a moment too long before answering. He weighed in his head which name he should give. Sorry, I ought to have told you earlier on. My name is Sam Grover. Pleasure, Sam. I'm Zebediah. This is my wife, Mary. They all nodded at one another. The man at the table did not look up, nor did they introduce him. Why don't you take a seat on the bed? He asked. Before he could respond, she shuffled across the room and propped up some pillows on the broken headboard. Here, come sit. Abel obliged her. Felt good to rest on the bed after spending so long on the ground and wandering through the country. Mary rummaged through one of the dresser drawers in search of a sewing needle. Zebediah pulled 2 chairs from the table and dragged one to either side of the bed. He took the seat by Abel's good arm. The man at the table was looking straight down, shifting in his chair a bit, tracing the grain patterns on the tabletop with his finger. Mary returned with her sewing kit and sat herself in the remaining chair. She removed the makeshift bandage, now soaked, and let it drop to the floor. She took the needle, and after a couple of attempts, she inserted a thread through its eye. She positioned her hands by Abel's wound before she thought better of it. Zeb, why don't you bring out some of that moonshine? Zebediah's eyes widened, then narrowed. He rose to his feet. Be right back, he said. Then he disappeared out the front door. A minute later, he returned with a glass bottle full of clear liquid. Mary took the bottle, uncorked it, and poured it on a long gash. It stung terribly. Abel winced hard and bit his lip to stop himself from yelping. It hurt worse than the cut itself. He punched himself in the leg as hard as he could. The entire time, the man at the table seemed uninterested in what was happening. He never stopped fidgeting with his hands, and he never looked up. Mary handed Zebediah the bottle, and he took a long swig. When he finished, he offered it to Abel. You might want a sip of this, son. Abel took the bottle from him and took a big gulp. It burned, but not like it had on his cut. Zebediah encouraged him to have another. Mary positioned her hands back near Abel's injury, and she aimed the needle at it near the intact skin on Abel's shoulder. Keep a good grip on that bottle. Use it if you need to, Zebediah said. Then the needle pierced the skin, and Mary sewed the flesh back together. The pain was sharp, but Abel was thankful it hadn't hurt nearly as bad as the moonshine had. He took another swig for good measure, and gripped the bottle hard until Mary finished stitching him up. There was a low rumble and a loud clattering from outside. The window panes rattled, and off in the distance a shrill whistle sounded. It's late, Mary said. Sleep here tonight, leave in the morning. You must rest after getting a scrape like that. How'd it happen anyway? Kid got bucked off his horse, Zebediah answered for him. Took a nasty fall, no doubt. Lucky you came by, Abel said. I'd still be under that tree if you had it. You'd probably be much worse off than that, Mary said. You sleep on the bed tonight. No, Abel countered. Y'all have done too much for me already. Stay the night, but please let me take the floor. Not on that arm, Zebediah said. Take the bed. They went back and forth for a few minutes, but Abel refused to rob them of their bed while he was a guest in their home. He had taken too much of their time already. Besides, something here just felt amiss. Zebediah took his cloak from the nail and the one from the chair back and told Abel he could use them as a blanket and pillow. He apologized for not having anything more comfortable. The thought where the other man was going to sleep struck Abel, and he was about to ask Zebediah, then thought better of it. There was no point in raising any eyebrows over showing concern for a Negro after all they had done for him. He would leave in the morning and forget about the whole thing. But wasn't it too odd? Who are you? Abel asked the man at the table. Zebediah's eyes widened again, and he shot a glance toward the man. Then he shot another glance toward Mary, who returned his look. Who, him? That's just Moses, Zebediah said at last. You don't have to worry about him. He's yours, Abel asked, unsure if this was an appropriate question to ask someone. Zebediah's face turned severe. Moses slapped his open palm on the table. He turned towards the bed and lifted his hand. His crooked finger pointed at Abel, opened his mouth to speak. Zebediah scurried in front of him, pushed his hand back down to the table, and held it there. After a couple of seconds, he released Moses' wrist, but he remained standing between the bed and the table. That's right, Zebediah said. What to make of that? Abel looked around the tiny house, the few material items that Zebediah and Mary owned. For how long? Abel asked. Oh, I don't know. A couple of years now, I reckon. I inherited them from my father when he passed. Ain't that right, Moses? Moses stared at Abel and nodded once, slow. He did not look away. His gaze was so uncomfortable that Abel had to turn his head. He could still feel Moses' eyes on him. What was he searching for? Right, Abel said. You really ought to rest, dear. Mary cut him off before he could say anything else. That's the best thing for you right now. Just lie down and go to sleep. The next day, Abel woke with a sore back throbbing arm. Sunlight poured in from the dusty windows, and Abel could see the home in a new light. Mary was busying herself over the stove. Abel stood and felt the heat filling the room, a welcome contrast to the cold floor. There was no sign of Zebediah or Moses. It was as if they had disappeared in the night. Thank you.
Thank you again, Deb, and to Noah, also to Anne Marie and Steve and David. Let's have another big round of applause for our graduating students.